Today is Monday, May 21st, 1990. Following will be a recorded interview with Mrs. Doris Nelson, registered nurse at Parkland Memorial Hospital on December 29th, 1982 at 1 p.m. Mrs. Nelson was the nurse in charge of the emergency room the day that President Kennedy was brought in after being shot in downtown Dallas in Dealey Plaza. She granted me this interview, which will be following shortly. My name is David Hall from Traverse City, Michigan, and this tape is being put together at the request of Mr. Robert Groden, who is co-author of the book High Treason. I just wish to add that approximately 9 months after my interview with Mrs. Nelson, there was Life magazine, came out in November 1983 with a large picture of Doris Nelson on the inside of this magazine with a brief story and an interview of her just shortly before she died of liver cancer, as the article stated, at age 52. One addition I'd like to give, and that is that while being interviewed at Parkland Hospital, Mrs. Nelson offered me a hospital newspaper that had been published and given to all members of the staff at Parkland Hospital that highlighted the happenings surrounding the President's assassination, Governor Connolly's wounds, and Lee Harvey Oswald being brought to that hospital 2 days later. I have a copy of that newspaper articles that she presented me that day in my Kennedy Library here at my residence.
William Manchester.
I said, well, I never run into William Manchester. Where he got the information from that he described in his book, I've never known. He said, no, you're not like that at all. He said, I just envisioned some old mean individual.
Yeah.
Because Manchester had described me as the white starch dragon and the rubber shod shoes in his book. It sounded like Jackie and I had a fighting match, which we didn't at all.
Yes.
You know.
Had you met his wife then? You met Mrs. Kennedy?
She was, yeah. I met everybody.
Really? You're a fantastic individual. When I heard that there was somebody actually here that present that day, you know, it's just like, you know.
I'll give you a brief scenario of what happened.
Okay.
You turn your tape recorder on since you're such an avid collector.
Thank you.
This will, yeah, I was going to say, this tape won't go anywhere but in that room.
Several of the nurses in the emergency room were at lunch, and we were all talking about Kennedy being in town, and I said, well, he's probably in the parade route, and it was about 12:15. And someone said, suppose he's in a car wreck, and I said, oh, they never bring him to Parkland. At that time, they didn't make all these pre-arrangements for visiting dignitaries like they do now for all the presidents and stuff, so I had, no, there was no arrangements made with us by the Secret Service prior to his arrival. I said, oh, they'd probably take him to Baylor. Baylor is one of the largest private hospitals in the city. So I walked back into the emergency room from lunch and into the surgical area, and the phone was ringing. And I picked up the phone. It said, surgery emergency room, Miss Nelson. And the operator said, Doris, the president's been shot and we'll be there in 5 minutes. I said, yeah, Phyllis, what else is new today? You know, something like this just doesn't click in your mind. But I know, she said, I've got to go. I've got to call some doctors. And I knew it was real, so I grabbed the head nurse and one of the surgery doctors, and I told them to get the trauma room set up and make sure everything was ready because the president would be here in 5 minutes. Well, it was difficult to convince him too. So I went out and saw another doctor coming down the hall, so I grabbed him too. And so they were all there waiting when he came in. We have what we call a triage system where a nurse sits at the front desk and she sees every patient that comes into the emergency room and determines their priority of care and their chief complaint. Well, I didn't have time to tell her that the president had been shot. So when they came in, there was no stretchers out on the dock because he was still in the limousine when they brought him in. and they needed stretchers, so the Secret Service agents came running in the door, and of course they were just frantic, you know, they had guns with them and all this stuff. Just scared that poor nurse to death.
Oh, my Lord.
She didn't know what was going on. She thought a bunch of wild men had gotten loose because she didn't know the president had been shot and was coming in. So when they wheeled in, they wheeled Connolly in first, and he was in the jump seat, and so he was the first one taken out. I was fairly new in Texas. I'd been here about 8 months. I didn't know who it was, but I figured he must be important if he'd gotten shot with Kennedy. So he looked rather pale, and I noticed he had a blood stain on his shirt. So you know how you just take a shirt and rip it, pop all the buttons off. Because it was my responsibility to see that the right doctors got in the right rooms to treat the right type of injuries and stuff like this. So I saw that he had a huge wound in his chest, and I figured that was his most significant wound. So when the chest surgeon arrived, that was the one I was going to put in the room with him. So shortly after he came in, right behind him, they brought Kennedy on a stretcher, and they had a coat thrown over his head, and Jackie had her roses laying on his body. And she was walking beside the cart with Secret Service agents pushing it. We put him in two, and I tried to, several doctors came down, they were in the room with him, and they attempted to tracheotomy him because he had apparently a bullet in his, went in his back and came out his throat, or went in his throat and came out his back. So they were doing a trach time and all those. Everything they was doing were just life-saving measures, but he was essentially dead when he got here, because he had a large portion of his brain that had been blown off right about in this area, with brain matter protruding from his head at the time that he came in here. Anyway, Jackie wanted to go in the room when they were doing the trach, and I told her I thought that, you know, the room was just full of doctors, you know, they were all so busy working. I thought it best that she not do it, you know, and she thought it best that she would. So some Secret Service agent informed me that she could do whatever she wanted to do. I said, "You got the gun, I don't." And, so I threw her roses in the garbage can and went home and soaked his blood out of my uniform like a fool I could have.
Yeah.
Yeah, soaked it all night, but he was essentially dead. There was no way he could have lived with the type of injuries that he had when he came in here. And one of the nurses, they were starting IVs and all over his arm, took his watch off for lack of any place else to put it, so it wouldn't get misplaced. She stuck it in her pocket, and then after they left and go back to the airport, she looked and she said, "Oh my Lord, I got the president's watch." So I said, "Well, no problem. We'll just turn in security and then give it back to the Secret Service."
That was.
Well, it wasn't so bad at that time because we were pretty well, you know, confined to outside people because of the Secret Service closing off all the entrance ways except for true emergency patients that needed to come in. But it was the news media afterwards, you know, someone had to be here 24 hours a day because otherwise they were constantly trying to get in the emergency room and take pictures and get in your way. And I mean, we were a busy emergency room. We had to keep all these people out so we could take care of our patients that were coming in. Because at that time we were seeing about 350 patients in a 24-hour period. Now we see in excess of 500 to 600 in a 24-hour period.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't long after that day that a lot of you people, including yourself, got burned out on these. You know, you see on TV.
Well, for several years we didn't talk to the news or anyone about it.
I'll bet.
Because everyone wrote up what their participation was in the incident, and it was sent to the administrator, and anything that anyone wanted to know, they got it from the administrator's office. Because no matter where you go now, if you run into someone that ever worked at Parkland, they were here when the president was shot, and they took care of him.
Yeah.
And I've heard more people say they took care of the president that I've never seen and never heard of before in my life, and I know that they're liars, you know.
Yeah.
And everybody takes care of the president. If you ever been to Parkland, you took care of the president.
To be honest with you, I was kind of surprised that I'd find somebody that was still here, you know, 'cause that's almost 20 years ago, you know.
I've been here 20 years last September.
Really?
Where'd you come from? You were
I originally came from Miami, but I'm from North Carolina.
Oh, I see.
Better turn your tape on.
Yeah. This is Doris Nelson, registered nurse at Parkland Memorial Hospital. The time now is 1:15 p.m., December 29th, 1982.
Additional information, things that I didn't get on tape, things that she shared with me during the time that I was with her in her office. One was that she had previously, just recently, prior to my arrival, had an interview and received an autographed copy of David Lifton's book, Best Evidence. She went on to say that she enjoyed Mr. Lifton's book, felt that it was to the best of her feeling and knowledge, a very accurate portrayal of some of the things that took place in regards to the cover-up that obviously entailed after the president's assassination. Some of her comments I wish I'd had on tape that I did not, because I waited for her permission before I turned my tape on. Another question I asked her was she interviewed by the Warren Commission? And of course she said that she had, but she did not elaborate, and I didn't feel like asking any questions that might become difficult for her to answer. One other thing I wanted to mention is that at the beginning of this tape you hear her talking about a description of her. The description that is being given, she's referring to William Manchester's book, Death of a President, of which she states that she was never interviewed by him, but he talks about a nasty scene between her and Jackie Kennedy, and that's what Doris is talking about when this tape first begins. One other addition I'd like to make at this time. On Wednesday, May 9th, 1990, there was a program entitled Hard Copy on ABC here locally at midnight. It was David Lifton talking about his recent tape and an updated version of his book, Best Evidence, and further evidence that he has uncovered in regards to the cover-up of President Kennedy's assassination, things that happened between Dallas and Bethesda. On Friday, May 11th, 1990, a voting results, and the question for the vote was on that Wednesday night, should President Kennedy's case be reopened? And they give two different 900 numbers that a person could call in to say yes or no. On Friday night, on May 11th, 1990, the vote was tallied. Over 40,000 calls were received. 98% said yes, the case should be opened. On May 14th, 1990, Monday, Mr. Lifton was back on the program one more time with part 2 of his presentation in regards to further evidence on Kennedy's assassination and the continuing saga of the cover-up or destruction of such evidence. It is my belief that sometime in the near future, individuals such as Mr. Lifton and the many others that have been conducting ongoing investigations over the years, such as Henry Hurt with his book entitled Reasonable Doubt, Mr. Groden and Mr. Livingstone's book, High Treason, Jim Marr's book, Crossfire. There are many, many books written on this subject. Mark Lane, of course, Rush to Judgment. Mr. Epstein's book, Inquest. Joshua Thompson's book, 6 Seconds in Dallas. And the list goes on. What I would like to see is these people all have an opportunity to sit down and discuss many of the same findings that they have found through the years in regards to President Kennedy's assassination and the subsequent cover-up. Also many books by Mr. Weisberg, The Whitewash, Contract on America, and the list goes on. At this time, Bob, I'd just like to add that I hope that you enjoy this tape and that perhaps might be of some benefit or use in regards to your study. Certainly like to hear from you, like to keep in touch, and perhaps we'll meet one day. I just hope that the people that are continuing their investigation into this sad day that befell us back in 1963 will one day receive our just reward and find the answers to the questions that we all have and continue to nag us and won't let us rest until we do have the truth. Once again, my address is Mr. David E. Hall, 170 Bass Lake Road, Traverse City, Michigan, 49684. Telephone is 616-943-8675. Thank you.